Life is lived on the obsidian edge, where the stakes are high and one wrong move can change your destiny in an instant. Join us for a thrilling ride through the most dangerous and exciting stories of the human heart. Hit subscribe now and stay on the edge with us. I noticed the window latch was already undone when I came back from the hardware store. I had locked it myself that morning. I was certain of it, the way a man of 67 is certain of anything. He has made a deliberate habit. The kind of certainty that comes not from arrogance, but from having buried a wife, raised a child alone, and spent 4 decades as a structural engineer who understood that small failures in a foundation are always the first sign of something catastrophic above. I stood in my mudroom, snow from the Muskoka Trail still melting off my boots onto the mat, and I looked at that unlatched window. I looked at it the way I used to look at stress fractures in load-bearing walls. I didn't say a word. I just noted it. I filed it. My name is Walter Greaves. And before I tell you how the woman my son brought home from Vancouver ended up handcuffed in a Huntsville courthouse wearing the same expression she'd had at her wedding, pure, unearned confidence, let me tell you what she didn't know about me. She didn't know that I had been suspicious of her for 9 months before I did a single thing about it. She didn't know that the man she saw every morning at the kitchen table slow with his coffee, squinting at the newspaper, needing 2 tries to open the child-proof lid on his blood pressure, medication was the same man who had once been called as an expert witness in 14 different fraud cases across Ontario. And she didn't know that the documents she had been photographing on the 3rd Thursday of every month, the ones in the mahogany filing cabinet in my study, were not the originals. I had switched them 11 months ago, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, so you understand exactly how a man ends up sitting across from his son's wife in a visiting room, watching her face collapse into something unrecognizable, while he feels nothing but the clean, cold satisfaction of a calculation that came out exactly right. My son Daniel was 34 when he brought her home for the first time. Her name was Vivian. She was sharp-eyed, quick laughing, the kind of woman who filled a room with a practiced warmth that felt generous until you realized it was strategic. She shook my hand firmly. She brought wine, a good bottle, not a show-off bottle, which told me she had done her research. She complimented the house in a way that was specific enough to seem genuine and broad enough to be deniable. I liked her immediately. That was the first warning sign. I don't like people immediately. Daniel was besotted. I understood it. He had been lonely since his mother passed, since Margaret died 3 years before, quietly, in the bedroom down the hall, holding my hand and telling me to make sure the gutters got cleaned before the first frost. He had been the kind of lonely that makes a man vulnerable in ways he doesn't recognize, the kind that disguises itself as readiness. They married 14 months later in a small ceremony at a resort on Lake Joseph. I paid for it. I paid for it because Daniel had asked me quietly, over breakfast one morning in March, his coffee going cold, whether I might be able to help out. He had a good job project manager at a logistics firm in Bracebridge, but Vivian wanted something beautiful, and he wanted to give her beautiful things. I wrote the check without hesitation. I wrote it because he was my son, and because Margaret would have wanted the boy to be happy. That was the last time I wrote a check without thinking carefully about where the money was going. The first year of marriage was unremarkable. They bought a condo in town. I saw them for dinner most Sundays. Vivian was pleasant, engaged, asking the right questions about the right topics. She remembered that I took my coffee black. She remembered that I didn't like cilantro. Small things. The kinds of small things that take real effort to track, which told me she was tracking them for a reason. In October of the 2nd year, they came to me with a proposal. The condo was too small, Daniel explained. They were thinking of starting a family. Would I be open to discussing the possibility of them moving in? Not permanently, just for a year, maybe 2, to save enough for a proper house. I said yes. I said yes because I was 65 and the house had 16 rooms and a silence in it that pressed against the walls at night like something living. I said yes because Daniel was my son. What I didn't say, what I filed quietly in the same mental cabinet where I had stored the unlatched window and the strategic wine, was that I noticed how Vivian's eyes moved when Daniel made the proposal. They didn't move to me. They moved to the room. They moved to the crown molding and the original Muskoka stone fireplace and the view of the lake through the back windows. They did a quick, professional inventory. She wasn't looking at a home. She was looking at an asset. They moved in on a Thursday in November. By the following March, I had lost my study. It happened gradually, the way all erosions do. First it was, "Walter, would you mind if we used your desk just for a few days while we're waiting on a piece of furniture?" Then it was, "Could we store a few boxes in here just temporarily?" Then it was, "We were thinking of using this as a home office since Daniel needs the space for his work calls and the light is so much better in here." Each step was reasonable. Each step was small. Each step moved me further from the room that contained my filing cabinet, my drafting table, the engineering manuals, and the original deed to this property. I let it happen. I retreated to the sunroom. I watched. The pattern that emerged over the following months was methodical enough to be admirable if it hadn't been aimed directly at me. Vivian worked from home. She was a project coordinator for a real estate development firm in Toronto, which I only fully appreciated in hindsight, and she was in the house while Daniel was at the office. She was in the house alone with me, which she treated as an opportunity rather than an obligation. She brought me tea I didn't ask for. She offered to drive me to my medical appointments. She inserted herself into my routine with the precision of someone who had read very carefully about how to be perceived as indispensable to an aging parent. She talked to Daniel about her worries, which I overheard through the thin wall between the kitchen and the sunroom. "He's been so forgetful lately. He left the stove burner on twice this week. I'm not sure he should be driving in winter conditions anymore, Walter. I just think we need to start thinking about this." I had not left the burner on. I had never left the burner on, but I said nothing. I started walking more slowly. I started furrowing my brow when I reached for words I already had. I started putting my reading glasses down in the wrong room and asking where they'd gone with a faintly confused expression, watching her face carefully when she retrieved them. She was good at hiding the satisfaction, but she wasn't perfect. On the third Thursday of May, 11 months after they'd moved in, I came back from a walk earlier than expected. A light rain had started up the trail, and my left knee was aching the way it sometimes does when the weather turns. I came through the side door quietly, the way you do when you are trying not to disturb anyone, and I heard a sound from my study that didn't belong there. It was the sound of my filing cabinet drawer being opened, not the sound of it being closed, being opened, slowly, carefully, the way you open something you don't have the right to open. I stood in the hallway. I did not move. I heard the shuffle of paper. I heard the quiet click of a phone camera. 1 photo, 2, pause, 3, then the drawer sliding shut. Then silence. I walked into the kitchen and put the kettle on. When Vivian came out of the study a few minutes later, she had her laptop under her arm and the expression of a woman who had simply been working. She saw me at the counter and stopped for a half second, a single beat of recalibration before she smiled. "You're back early. How was the trail?" "Knee was bothering me," I said. "How's the work going?" "Oh, you know, always something." She put the kettle in the cupboard. I had already made the tea. I watched her pour herself a glass of water and go upstairs. I stood in the kitchen and I did not panic, because I am a structural engineer. And the first thing a structural engineer learns is that when you find a fault, you don't start swinging a sledgehammer. You map the damage first. You understand the full extent of the compromise before you decide what to reinforce and what to let fall. I had dinner with my old colleague Gerald Barry that Friday evening. Gerald had been a real estate lawyer for 31 years before he retired to a cottage on Lake of Bays, and he had the kind of quiet, total competence that makes men like him invisible until the moment you desperately need them. I told him what I had seen. He didn't react with alarm. He reacted the way I did with calculation. We talked for 3 hours. By the end of the evening, I had a plan. The following Monday, I called my notary and arranged to have the property deed, the will, my power of attorney documents, and the ownership transfer papers for the investment accounts, all of it moved to a secure location at Gerald's office. What I placed back in the filing cabinet were perfect duplicates. Same formatting, same fonts, same aged paper stock that Gerald sourced from an archival supplier who owed him a favor. The signatures on the duplicates were mine, but they had been made using a specific, consistent variation, a slight rightward lean on the G in Greaves that I had practiced for 2 weeks until it felt natural. Distinctive enough to be mine, different enough to be useless in a court of law, I also started keeping a journal, not the kind you write in, the kind you document. Dates, times, what was moved, photographed, touched. The pattern of a woman building a case, not knowing the case she was building was a trap door. The months that followed were the most performative of my life. I let the forgetfulness deepen. I began misremembering Daniel's work schedule and conversation. I called Vivian by my late wife's name twice, watching her carefully to see if her reaction was sympathy or opportunity. It was opportunity. She brought it up to Daniel the same evening. I heard her through the wall. "She's mixing up names, Daniel. He called me Margaret at lunch. It's not the first time. I think we need to talk to his doctor." Daniel came to me with soft eyes and a careful voice, the way you approach a dog that might bite. "Dad, are you sleeping all right? I just want to make sure you're doing okay. You can tell me if things feel harder." I told him I was fine, just tired. I watched his face. I watched the conflict in it, the genuine love of a son and the quiet anxiety of a man whose wife was narrating a version of his father that was slightly different from the one he'd grown up with. She was patient, Vivian. She was building her case one careful brick at a time, and she had recruited Daniel as an unwitting architect. I did not tell Daniel what I suspected. Not yet. I needed evidence, not a family argument. An argument would have made her more careful. Evidence would make her careless. In September, she made her first real move. I found out from the notary, who called me on a Tuesday morning, with the careful tone of a professional delivering news he'd rather not deliver. Someone had come into his office, claiming to be acting on my behalf, requesting information about the property transfer process and whether an elderly owner experiencing cognitive decline could sign over his primary residence voluntarily. The notary had told them nothing. He had called me immediately. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after we hung up. Outside, the lake was doing what Muskoka lakes do in September, going still and bronze in the afternoon light, quiet as a held breath. She was starting to move faster, which meant she either sensed she was running out of time, or she had completed whatever groundwork she'd been laying with the photographs and was ready to use it. I called Gerald. He came over that evening, and we sat in the sunroom with the door closed, while Vivian and Daniel were in the kitchen after dinner, and we talked about timelines. "I didn't have a year," Gerald said. "Maybe 4 to 6 weeks before whatever she was building reached a point of no return." I told him I was ready. The next morning, I made an appointment with my family physician for a full cognitive assessment. I asked her to document, in writing, that I presented with sharp recall, no confusion, full orientation to person, time and place, and complete legal capacity. She looked at me over her reading glasses with the expression of a woman who had seen enough of life to find most things reasonable. "You seem fine to me, Walter." "I need it in writing," I said. "With a date. I need a paper trail." She wrote the report. I had it notarized, and a copy couriered to Gerald's office. I made 6 additional copies and stored them in locations that had nothing to do with this house. Then I waited. Vivian moved on a Wednesday in the 3rd week of October. I know this because I was sitting in the sunroom with my knee elevated on a footstool, pretending to read a fishing magazine, when I heard her on the phone in the kitchen. She was speaking quietly, but the acoustics in a stone house are unforgiving, and I had been listening carefully for months. She was speaking to someone she called Marcus. Marcus, apparently, was a notary she had found through her firm's legal contacts, not my notary, a different one. She was asking about a voluntary property transfer. She was saying the owner had previously expressed a wish to transfer the property to family members before his estate was settled. She was confirming that yes, she had documentation supporting this. She had the owner's signatures on the preliminary transfer request forms. She had the signatures from my filing cabinet, the ones on the aged paper, with the G leaning slightly right. I lowered the fishing magazine. I breathed slowly. I thought about everything Gerald and I had discussed. Then I picked up my phone and sent Gerald a single text. "It's happening," he replied within 30 seconds. "I'll call the investigator. Keep the phone on." I put the magazine back in my lap and listened to Vivian finish her call. I heard her say she would come by the office Friday morning at 10 with the documents and the owner. The owner, meaning me, of whom she had clearly not yet informed. When she came back into the sunroom to check on me, she did this regularly now. Small performance of care. I was exactly where she had left me. Reading glasses on, fishing magazine at the appropriate page, the expression of a man gently blurring at the edges. "How's the knee, Walter?" "A bit better," I told her. "I might try a short walk after dinner if the rain holds off." She smiled. "I'll bring you your jacket." She was kind to me that evening. She made a casserole Daniel liked and put extra on my plate. She asked about Margaret. She did this sometimes. "Let me talk about my wife." And she listened with her chin resting in her hand, performing patience. I talked about Margaret for 20 minutes. I talked about how she used to drive to Huntsville every August for the art show, how she made butter tarts at Christmas that the whole neighborhood came for, how she had laughed the first time she saw the house and said it was too big for 2 people, and then proceeded to fill every room with something that mattered. Vivian listened. She said the right things. She had gotten very good at saying the right things. That night, after Daniel and Vivian had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a long time. I thought about what I was about to do. I thought about whether there was another way, whether I had been wrong, whether the woman across from me at dinner was exactly what she appeared to be, and I was a paranoid old man, building elaborate defenses against a shadow. And then I remembered the sound of my filing cabinet drawer opening. I remembered the camera clicks. I remembered her voice asking Marcus about a voluntary property transfer. I went to bed. I slept soundly. On Friday morning, I told Daniel I had a doctor's appointment at 9:30 and that I would probably grab breakfast in town afterward. He offered to drive me. I said I was fine. He gave me a look, the soft-eyed look that Vivian had been cultivating in him for months, and I put a hand on his arm and told him I'd see him at lunch. I drove to Gerald's office. He was waiting with 2 people I hadn't met before. The first was a woman named Detective Sergeant Renee Lapointe from the OPP Financial Crimes Unit, who had the compact, efficient energy of someone who did not waste time on theater. The second was a man named Yannick, a private investigator Gerald had used for years, who had spent the last 3 weeks documenting Vivian's communications with Marcus the notary, her inquiries at the land registry office, and 2 visits she had made to a real estate development firm in Barrie that had, as recently as August, submitted a development proposal for a lakefront property whose address bore a striking resemblance to mine. They had been preparing to approach the land registry with documentation supporting a voluntary transfer. The documentation included what appeared to be my signature on a preliminary transfer form, a letter allegedly from my physician noting concerns about my cognitive function and suggesting that managing property independently was becoming difficult, and a sworn statement from Vivian as a family member acting in my best interest. The letter from my physician was a forgery. D.S. Lapointe put the copy on the table in front of me, and I looked at my doctor's name at the bottom, spelled correctly. Font a reasonable approximation, and felt the cold, clean anger of confirmation, not the hot anger of surprise. I had been expecting this, but confirmation of something you have suspected is its own particular weight. "What would like to do, Mr. Greaves?" D.S. Lapointe asked. I unfolded the paper Gerald had been holding, the one from my actual physician, dated 4 weeks earlier. I placed it next to the forgery. "I would like to let her take me to the notary," I said. Gerald looked at me. "Walter, I want the full picture," I said. "I want her on record, in front of a notary, presenting forged documents. I want it to be inarguable." D.S. Lapointe studied me for a moment. She had the expression of a woman reassessing something she thought she had already assessed. "If you go in, you need to appear cooperative. You cannot let on that you know." "I have been not letting on for 11 months, I said. "I think I can manage one more morning." She allowed herself a brief, dry smile. "We'll be outside. The moment the documents are presented, we come in." I drove home. Vivian was in the kitchen when I arrived, and the expression on her face when she saw me relief, quickly masked as welcome, confirmed that she had been worried I'd missed my window. "Oh, good, you're back. How was the appointment?" "Fine," I said. "Clean bill of health. You know how it is." She didn't flinch. She was too good for that. She said she was glad, and offered me coffee, and told me, almost casually, that she had actually been hoping to talk to me about something. She said that she and Daniel had been discussing things. She made it sound like a joint decision, as if Daniel were part of this, which he was not, and that they thought it might be a good idea for me to start thinking about simplifying things. Financially. Administratively. The property, specifically. Managing a property this size was a lot for one person, she said. She said she had been in touch with someone who could help facilitate a transfer of the title into a family trust, which would protect the asset while ensuring I was still taken care of. She laid it out smoothly. She had practiced this. She was calm and she was warm and she kept touching my hand. I let her talk. I nodded slowly. I said, I suppose that made sense, in the way an old man says things make sense when he is tired of thinking about them. I said I would trust her judgment. She made a call. 35 minutes later, we were sitting in Marcus's office on Main Street. Marcus was a thin man with expensive glasses and the nervous energy of someone who had been doing something slightly wrong for a long time and had gotten used to it. He greeted me with exaggerated gentleness, the kind reserved for the very young and the very old and the people you need something from. He offered me water. He asked if I needed anything repeated. He explained everything twice. I signed where he indicated. The G leaned slightly right. D.S. Lapointe came through the door 90 seconds later. What happened next was not dramatic, in the way that satisfying things are sometimes dramatic. There was no shouting. There was no running. Vivian simply went very still, the way a structure goes still in the moment before a controlled demolition, when all the supports are gone and the building hasn't yet understood that it is falling. I am placing you under arrest, D.S. Lapointe said to Vivian, for fraud over $5,000 and forgery of a document under Part 9 of the Criminal Code of Canada. You have the right to retain and instruct counsel. Vivian looked at me. She didn't look at the detective. She didn't look at Marcus, who had gone the color of old chalk. She looked at me. I looked back. I didn't look at why. I wanted her to see my face clearly because I wanted her to understand in that precise moment that the man across from her had not been confused, had not been softening, had not been the raw material for someone else's plans. You knew, she said. It was barely a whisper. Since May, I said. The third Thursday. She sat down in the chair behind her. Not because she was asked to, because her legs stopped working. The next 2 hours were administrative. D.S. Lapointe and her partner took statements. Marcus was escorted from his own office. Gerald arrived and handled the paperwork with the efficiency of a man who had been waiting patiently for this exact moment and had no interest in celebrating before the work was finished. I called Daniel from the parking lot. He didn't speak for a long time after I finished. I stood by my truck in the October cold, the lake visible at the end of the street, flat and silver in the afternoon light. And I listened to my son not speaking. Dad, he finally said. His voice was wrecked. I know, I said. Why didn't you tell me? I needed to be sure, I said. And I needed you to be able to say honestly that you had no idea. Because you didn't. And that matters, Daniel. She told me you were getting confused. She told me she was worried about you. I know what she told you. I thought he stopped. He tried again. I thought I was doing the right thing by listening to her. I thought she was looking out for you. She was looking out for the property, I said. That's not the same thing. He drove to Huntsville that afternoon. He sat across from me at the kitchen table where he had eaten dinner every night of his childhood, and he looked at me with an expression I recognized, the stripped, exposed look of someone whose understanding of their own life has just been restructured from the foundation up. I made tea. I let him be quiet for a while. That is sometimes the kindest thing. Eventually, he asked what was going to happen. I told him she would be charged. I told him the forged physician's letter was a serious matter, and that the fraud charge carried significant weight. I told him Gerald estimated she would be looking at real consequences. I told him the property was secure, and had always been secure, that the documents she had photographed and attempted to use were copies of nothing, worth exactly the paper they were printed on. He looked up at that. What do you mean, copies? I told him about the switch, about the aged paper and the notary and Gerald's archival contact, about the G leaning slightly right. He stared at me for a long moment. You're an engineer, he said. Structural, I confirmed. So you built a trap. I identified a fault and reinforced the critical systems, I said. Then I waited. He almost laughed. Almost. He was too tired and too gutted for a full laugh. But something crossed his face that was adjacent to it, the involuntary recognition of something that would, in time, be a story. The hearing was on a Thursday in November. A year, almost to the week, since they had moved in. Gerald and I arrived early. I wore the suit I had worn to Margaret's funeral and to Daniel's university graduation, the good charcoal one that still fit because I had been walking every morning regardless of the knee. I sat in the second row. I didn't need to be up front. The evidence spoke for itself. It had been speaking very clearly for several weeks, in the patient, thorough language of documentary proof that Gerald and D.S. Lapointe had assembled with the kind of care that makes defense lawyers go quiet. Vivian was brought in. She had a good lawyer. Her family had retained someone from Toronto who wore the right suit and spoke in the right register. He made arguments about intent, about the ambiguity of document preparation, about the absence of a completed transfer. He was precise and professional, and doing exactly what he had been paid to do. The judge listened to all of it. Then Gerald presented the cognitive assessment, the actual one, dated and notarized, showing that on the date in question I had been assessed as fully competent, with no indication of cognitive decline whatsoever. Then he presented the original property documents, secure and unaltered, demonstrating that no legitimate transfer had been initiated. Then he presented the analysis of the forged physician's letter, which had been prepared by a forensic document examiner and which demonstrated, in specific technical terms, exactly how the letterhead had been replicated and where the signature differed from the verified original. Then he played the audio from Marcus's office. The recording was clean. Marcus's voice, Vivian's voice, the careful narration of a transaction built on documents that did not mean what she had represented them to mean. The judge stopped Gerald midway through and asked him to replay a section. He replayed it. The judge made a note. There was a recess. When the session resumed, the judge found sufficient cause to proceed to trial. Vivian was remanded on bail conditions that included surrendering her passport and making no contact with me or Daniel. She looked at me once, as she was being let out. She had the expression of a woman running a fast, furious recalculation, trying to identify where the error had occurred, which decision had been the wrong one. She couldn't find it. That was the point. There was no single error. The entire structure had been unsound from the start. Daniel was waiting outside. He had not come in for the hearing. His lawyer, Gerald, and I had agreed that was cleanest. He was sitting on a bench in the November cold with his collar turned up, his hands on his knees, looking like a man who had not slept well in 3 weeks because he hadn't. He looked up when I came out. I sat down beside him. The lake was visible at the end of the street. November Muskoka, everything stripped down to its essentials, gray water, bare birch, the hard, clean smell of coming snow. He asked what happened. I told him. He sat with it for a while. Then he asked what happens now. Now, I said, you go talk to your lawyer about the marriage, and I go fix the lock on the study door. He almost laughed again. This time it made it further. We sat on that bench for a while, the two of us, the way we used to sit on the dock in August when he was a boy, not needing to fill the quiet. The town moved around us, a couple with a stroller, a man loading lumber into a truck, the ordinary, irreplaceable motion of a regular Thursday. I want you to know something, I told him. He turned. I didn't do this to hurt you, I said. I did it because the alternative was losing something I built for 40 years and planned to leave to you. I did it because your mother would have wanted this house to go where it was supposed to go. He nodded. He looked at the lake. She really had me, he said. She was patient, I said. Patient and smart. Those aren't bad qualities. They just pointed at the wrong thing. He was quiet again. Then, I keep thinking about the Sunday dinners, whether any of it was real. Some of it might have been, I said honestly. It doesn't really matter now. He looked at me sidelong. How are you so calm about it? Because I knew, I said. Once you know, you are not a victim anymore. You are just an engineer watching a structure come down. He drove me home. We had dinner, the two of us, at the big kitchen table with the extra chairs empty, and we talked about his mother for a while, the way you talk about someone who has been gone long enough that the grief has turned into something more like weather present, varying, occasionally sharp, but part of the landscape now. He asked about her butter tarts. I told him I still had the recipe card in her handwriting, tucked in the back of the recipe box where it had always been. He asked if I would teach him. I said yes. The charges took 11 months to resolve. Vivian pleaded guilty to fraud over $5,000 and a reduced forgery charge in exchange for a conditional sentence and restitution. She will not be going to prison, which is not the outcome I would have designed, but which Gerald tells me is a reasonable result, given the circumstances, that no transfer was completed and no money was actually lost. She will carry a criminal record. She will be known in the specific, indelible way that court records make people known. I sold the condo she and Daniel had shared. My name was not on it, but the down payment had come from me, and Daniel was the sole owner, so we handled it between us without drama. He moved back into the house for a while into his old room at the end of the hall, and we found, to neither of our great surprise, that we were reasonably good company for each other. He cooks better than I do. I fix things better than he does. It evens out. In the spring, I replaced the lock on the study door. I reinstated the original documents in the filing cabinet. I called my notary and updated the will to reflect current intentions. I went back to walking the trail every morning, even when the knee ached, because stopping is not a habit I intend to develop. There is one more thing I want to tell you. About 3 months after the hearing, I drove down to Barrie to see the development firm whose proposal I had found in Yannick's report, the one for the lakefront property that looked like mine. I walked into their offices without an appointment and asked to speak with whoever had initiated the proposal. A woman came out, not young, not old, the kind of efficient mid-career professional who has seen most things and is surprised by very few of them. I told her who I was. I told her the property was not available and had never been available and would not be available in my lifetime. I told her that if she received any further approaches regarding it, she should contact Gerald Barrie directly. She looked at me for a moment. "I'm sorry for the trouble," she said. "We were given to understand the situation was different." "I imagine you were," I said. I walked back to my truck. I drove north. The highway cuts through the Canadian Shield up there, through the kind of country that makes you understand, on a cellular level, why people come and why they stay, the rock and the water and the trees doing exactly what they have always done, indifferent to the specific human dramas playing out at their edges. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the 40 years of mornings in that kitchen. I thought about the 16 rooms and the summer light on the lake, and the fact that the house was still mine, still exactly where it was supposed to be, registered in my name at the land registry office in Bracebridge, with no encumbrances, no competing claims, no forged signatures. I thought about a woman who had spent 11 months being patient and smart and pointing those qualities at the wrong thing. I thought about a G that leans slightly right. Some people see an old man and assume the story is mostly over. They see the gray hair and the slow knee and the second try on the child-proof lid, and they calculate accordingly. What they don't calculate is 40 years of paying attention to the way things fail. What they don't calculate is a man who learned, by profession and by temperament, that the structure you cannot see is always the one that matters most. The house is still standing. It was built to. If you've ever had to protect something important from someone who mistook your patience for weakness, leave it in the comments. I'd like to hear your story.